Hey guys, my name is Carol Hoff, and today we're going to be looking at the complicated matter of rape. That will be a brief description of what rape is and why this definition matters. The definition of rape is complex, and depending on what definition and source material you take your information from, the stats will show vastly different results. I'll take a brief look at the definitions in our state and compare them to a few national rates to show the difference our words can make on this topic. By changing a few simple words, the way rape is reported in the U.S. can change drastically. In combination with what seems like a simple issue, I'll also briefly discuss the statistics of this crime and the way it's reported, or actually underreported. Inconsistent definition and reports of rape in the U.S. can cause a major skew in data when we observe and try to address it. Finally, I will also address ways to fix the issue so the stats are more accurate, I guess. So, first off, what is your definition of rape? Take a second to think about it. We all learned about this a couple of weeks ago, but we are all still subject to different influences in our lives and cultures that will still make this change from person to person. My definition is any sexual behavior performed on someone without their consent. It's simple and to the point. However, the state of Georgia actually disagrees with me. To rape someone in the state of Georgia is to have carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will, or a female under the age of 10. Carnal knowledge refers to any penetration of the female sexual organ by the male sexual organ. Marriage is not a defense against a rape charge in Georgia. So that ends up being a little different, right? It ends up specifically stating the genders and that it's forcible and against her will. It's a little bit more complicated than mine. So mine actually ends up being a little bit more similar to sexual battery, which occurs when the defendant intentionally makes physical contact with the intimate parts of the body or another person without the consent of that person. A little bit closer, but still not exact. To make this even more complicated, we have to look about how the nation defines rape. This is a federal standard, and before any revision took place, the definition looks a lot more similar to Georgia's. Carnal knowledge of a female forcibly against her will. Yet again, gender specific. After some revisions took place, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. It's more complicated, but yes, it does include a lot more. But man, does this get exhausting when we have to start revising things to make it more inclusive. It just gets exhausting, right? But it still does matter. And to kind of comprehensively look at this, we're going to start looking at the history of rape's legal definition. So, in the beginning, spousal rape was not completely illegal. It wasn't until 1993 that that became a thing, right? So, because of people like Sir Matthew Hale, who was a 18th century jurist, a lot of people kind of thought that a man couldn't rape his wife. So now that we know that that actually can happen and a lot more people are accepting of this, his antiquated beliefs are not really around anymore. To kind of summarize those beliefs, I added a quote in that I thought was pretty funny, but not really. So let's take a look at that. He says, "The husband cannot be guilty of a rape committed by himself upon his lawful wife. For by their mutual matrimonial consent and contract that wife hath given up herself in this kind unto the husband which she cannot retract." Wow, that is not my idea of what a marriage should be. Not sure about you guys, but I would hope that you think this is as ridiculous as me. So the next thing that feminists started taking a charge against in the 70s was the ideas that rape had to be defined by the use of force and the level of resistance that took place, even the amount of consent that was given during the act. So the degrees of force and resistance and consent finally ended up changing during this time when feminists took action against this. They said that enough was enough and you didn't have to actually define all these to say what happened to you. You could actually say that no, physical force wasn't used against me, possibly mental force was used against me. I was traumatized and I felt paralyzed by that trauma. Or you could even say that no, I changed my mind and did not decide to give my consent. So these things definitely did matter and they ended up changing a lot for everybody. The last thing, which is another thing that we're still fighting to this day, is gender equality. As I said before, by having a gendered statement like our Georgia's definition, that ends up hurting and ignoring a lot of people. During my research, I found a few people that also agreed with me. Krushnet et al., he finally says that the new definition is a substantial change from the older definition. It recognizes that males as well as females may be rape victims. It includes penetration in the anus and mouth as well as the vagina. It includes penetration by body parts other than a penis or by objects. This changed a lot. It included everything. It made it all encompassing so that everybody can be heard and recognized for rape. So at this point, I keep on saying a few acronyms that might not make sense. So to really understand what goes on with the definition and even understand the history of what happened, we have to look at where these numbers are coming from, right? That means that they come from reporting agencies. As criminologists, we do in fact do our own research, but we do have to look at reporting agencies for larger numbers on state and federal levels. Two of the biggest agencies that we use are the UCR, which is a voluntary report from the FBI, and also the National Crime Victimization Survey, which is brought to us by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The UCR, like I said, is a voluntary report. Luckily, 95% of law enforcement agencies contribute to this. It ends up still being a little confusing because certain crimes, like rape, are defined differently by each state. And not even just rape, all crimes can be defined differently. And I would just really hate to be the person that has to go through that and try to find the uniformity in it all. The National Crime Victimization Survey is actually a crime report that gives us statistics on crimes that are reported and not reported, and they even go into the details of why crimes were not reported as well. So it's really great that we end up trying to get the crimes that were missed by the underreporting factor that we have. Both of these agencies take measurements in different ways, which of course is a big problem, right? So just to take a look at some of the ways that the UCR and the NCVS are different. The UCR excludes sexual assault. And like we were saying before, Georgia, for example, does not include rape or does not define rape as something that can happen to a man. It has to be done by a man on a woman. So anything outside of that ends up being kind of cataloged as sexual assault. So if UCR doesn't even include sexual assault, there's a lot of numbers that are missing there, right? The UCR also has accounts of crimes reported by law enforcement agencies, and that's it. They're only reported crimes, right? And then they add in this weight to compensate for incomplete reporting. So either reports that aren't completed or reports that weren't even made. They just put in a percentage to try to make up for the inaccuracy. On the NCVS side, they don't measure crimes against people who are homeless, live in institutions, or on military bases. That's a lot of people right there. So if you don't have a home or live in a nursing home or in jail or are on a military base, none of that is counted. They also don't measure crimes against people under the age of 11. So that is a lot of people still that are just not being included. The UCR does measure crime against all U.S. residents, including crimes against kids. So based on what we're trying to examine, you need to know what reporting agency to go to and how accurate they will be for your study. This is really important when you want to put forward accurate research. So you need to do your homework even deeper to make sure that you can trust these reports that are being given to you. And just to show how scary that is, we're going to look at some of the numbers that you can get from these agencies and how different they are. The stats on rape can change depending on what level you want to take a look at. So if we want to take a look at the numbers from Georgia, the most recent ones that the UCR has reported by the GBI are from 2017. Those numbers are 2,656 reported cases of rape. You want to go a little bit deeper, and we have Carrollton, right? That's where we're from. That's only 35 reported cases of rape in 1 year. It seems a little low from the stuff that we've been learning recently. So then if we want to go a little bit bigger, we look on a federal level. That is what the Federal Bureau of Investigation reports through the UCR. Yet again, 2017 is the most recent they have. That's 135,755. Okay, a lot bigger number. But like I have written here, this is the revised Uniform Crime Report from what the UCR defines. If we want to go to a little scarier number, let's take a look at the National Victim Survey, and that includes not reported. 459,310. That's a huge difference right there. And just for a cherry on top, if we look at the old definition that the Uniform Crime Report used of rape back before it included, men, that would only be 99,856. That's a lot of people missing that are not being accounted for. These are crazy differences, right? That's a definition that the UCR used would exclude 35,899 people. They just would not have counted. And then due to the issues of underreporting, the NCVS shows that in just 2017 alone, an additional 323,555 incidents were not reported at all. That's a huge deal. And that brings us to another problem with the definition of rape and just rape in general. Underreporting. Underreporting makes stats so confusing because, as we saw the difference between the National Victim Survey and the UCR, those numbers were huge. So the main difference between that is that just people don't come out and say that they've been raped. Stewart et al., using the National Victim Centers, found that 5 out of 6 rapes were never reported. Only 22% of the reported cases were reported by the victim themselves. But another big thing that they found that stood out to me was that the cultural stigma that takes place around this issue. That cultural stigma led to them seeing that a lot of police officers and prosecutors don't view people as real victims. And that, of course, can make you not want to come out. The reason they weren't seeing these people as real victims is because of crazy things. These reasons included a prior relationship to the assailant, a delay in reporting the crime, if you were a prostitute, a black woman, a welfare recipient, a hitchhiker, obese, or even being under the influence of drugs, you weren't considered real to them. So If you can't even go to the people that are supposed to help you, why would you go to them at all? If the culture would not view the act as rape despite how the person feels, the victim may not report or much less pursue a conviction because they are convinced that they were not in fact raped. We even have other people that are finally admitting that this inconsistent definition of rape is very confusing and affects how surveys are completed for the stats. So if you have these outside influences influencing you from the very beginning, it just causes a lot of problems. So to drive it to a point, why does this matter? All of this matters because people should be heard. The definitions have changed, like we discussed earlier. Rape now includes, in some places, spousal rape, rape of all genders, and it's now less restrictive and hung up on the levels of force and resistance. They have also been more inclusive on the definitions of consent. But even with this progress, in 2017, 323,555 people were not heard. In 2015, Briere and Davis Siegel looked at the effects that the revised UCR had on our nation's rape statistics. They found that 40% of cases would have not been counted for the revision. Of the 40%, 26% of those included one male victim. That 40% would also consist of more juvenile victims. In addition to that, the most common missed act of sexual assault was sodomy. This is why this matters. There are voices that are not being heard because of antiquated terminologies. So, how do we fix this issue? The first off, reform and revision. We got off to a great start in the 70s, but that took a decade to see any type of change to take place in the legal system. We have to keep going and keep yelling and screaming until our voices are heard, every single one of them. Representation matters at every step, and to have a completely universal and all-encompassing definition of what it means to be sexually assaulted is a great place to start. That brings me to consistency on a national level. Having states with different versions of what it means to be truly raped makes everything harder. It affects the victims, the assailants, and the researchers that are trying to understand this crime. Consistency on a national level in terms of just defining this act is a great place to start. And as always, we need more training and education. Once the definition is standardized, so can the training and education that is involved in rape work. By defining the term rape and the criminal acts that surround the crime on a consistent level, rape myths and misunderstandings can be dispelled. Thank you guys for listening to me today. I know this was a topic that really hit me hard this semester, and the more I looked into it, the more shocked I was to see the numbers and all of that drawing back to how we define an issue and how simple that seems at first really spoke out to me. So please take a look at any of the research that I found during all of this. All of this was really, really interesting. And I hope you have a great rest of your semester. Thanks, guys.